It started with a missing toaster, small, mundane, but significant because when you live alone and your front porch is the altar of modern convenience, packages are sacrament. One day a box would be there, the next it would be gone, and after the third and fourth disappearances the pattern was unmistakable. The thefts all happened between 2 o'clock and 4 p.m., the same window when Karen Mayers, the HOA president with a pastel cardigan for armor and a clipboard she wielded like a gavel, was always at home. Karen, who had fined me for a garden gnome and emailed passive-aggressive policy memos about trashcan aesthetics and porch lights, had treated our cul-de-sac like her personal fiefdom, and the feeling that she was behind the vanishing packages hardened into conviction when a doorbell cam recorded her strolling up the walk, scanning my porch as though on a neighborhood inspection, and tucking an Amazon box under her arm with a smirk that was almost theatrical, so I leveraged a different kind of engineering than the circuits I used by day and devised what I called, less poetically and more mischievously, Project Dye Job, a decoy package rig with a non-toxic, indelible magenta dye pack that would spray a fine mist when the box was lifted, leaving stains that bleach and water couldn't fully erase, and thus painting the thief with undeniable shame. I baited the trap with something small and tempting, a Bluetooth shower speaker. Set the camera, hid upstairs, and watched as Karen, leash in hand and Princess the Shih Tzu trotting, performed the familiar sweep, bent down, and triggered a mechanism, emitting a glorious flood of color that coated her cardigan, hands, and face in fluorescent humiliation, and produced a sound like a betrayed gasp that I rewound and watched until laughter made me dizzy. The neighborhood private Facebook lit up with speculation and schadenfreude. Karen missed a weekend brunch and went conspicuously quiet, and when she finally knocked on my door days later, she still bore faint pink shadows even after repeated showers, the dye clinging like guilt, and accused me of harassment while I calmly pointed to the footage that showed her taking my parcel. Footage I then escalated to the HOA board in an equally calm, formal email that attached the video and asked for guidance rather than threats, which is how we ended up packed into the clubhouse with Karen trying to look composed and the HD recording playing on the big screen for all to see. Karen reaching, taking, and then being spectacularly doused, Princess barking in the background, and a room full of neighbors watching the curtain drop on her plausible deniability. The board, mostly people who had their own grievances with Karen's micromanagement, voted to suspend her pending review, and she left the meeting stony and blotched, glaring at me with a kind of fury that promises reprisal, which I took as a closing scene until the following morning when an unmarked envelope on my porch contained a single line of cursive. You think you won, but you have no idea what's coming next. K. And the breeze that day tasted faintly threatening. I expected escalation and prepared accordingly. More cameras, careful records of deliveries, legal advice lined up in case she manufactured fines or retaliatory notices. But Karen did not choose petty administrative warfare alone. She started a whisper campaign, sent anonymous complaints claiming my motion sensor violated HOA aesthetics, and had a notice taped to my door accusing me of an unauthorized visible security device, which was comically hypocritical given she'd been caught on video stealing. The board, now aware of the evidence and sensing the political theater she hoped to stage, asked Karen for an explanation and suggested mediation, but she refused to accept anything short of complete vindication. So I doubled down on transparency, posting a link to the footage and a polite account of events in the community group, while offering to withdraw any legal complaint if the board instituted clear delivery policies and a clause forbidding board members from handling residents' packages, something reasonable that would have avoided the entire mess if applied from the start. That move split the neighborhood, some calling me a vigilante who'd humiliated an elderly woman, others applauding the engineering justice of the dye and the clarity the video provided, and the debate culminated in a heated meeting where Karen, still irate and still faintly stained, tried to cast herself as a concerned citizen protecting the community from suspicious parcels, but the evidence was stubborn in the chorus of small grievances against her, quotas of fines for holiday wreaths, demand letters about head heights, a long record of unilateral rulemaking, made her case look less like civic heroism and more like an abuse of petty authority. Yet even as a board voted to reprimand her and tighten rules to prevent board members from intercepting deliveries, Karen's parting shot, carefully anonymous notes, and a few petty retaliations like reporting my trash cans and sending formal notices about my camera's visibility reminded me that people like her don't go quietly into corrective behavior. They simmer. So I pursued both paths simultaneously, public transparency and quiet legal safeguard. And when she escalated to report to me for harassment, I had my documented timestamps, an eyewitness list, and multiple independent deliveries captured by different devices, which made any claim she might bring look not only weak but vindictive. The final twist came not from another dive bomb, but from Karen's own unraveling. During the board's formal review, more neighbors came forward with their own recordings and stories, some small, some humiliating, and the accumulation of petty violations, unexplained fines, and her refusal to accept reasonable authority replaced by performative control led the board to remove her from the presidency and recommend she take a community education course on governance and civility, which she accepted with a tight-lipped face that suggested humiliation was only the beginning of a long, private fury. The die, which had seemed like a childish triumph at the outset, turned into an odd kind of civic lubricant. Its public spectacle forced an institution to reckon with unaccountable power, nudge the community toward clearer rules, and expose how easily someone's self-appointed authority can mask petty theft. But it also left me with an uncomfortable aftertaste. I had engineered a trap and felt the thrill of poetic justice. Yes, but I also understood that once you cross from documenting to baiting, you slide into a different moral lane where the intent matters less than the outcome, and while the neighborhood regained a measure of peace, I locked my porch box, left visible cameras up like sober sentinels, and kept an eye on the mailbox for any more anonymous envelopes, because Karen's final line, "You have no idea what's coming next," had been a threat not of physical harm, but a tenacity, and tenacity can be quiet, bureaucratic, and corrosive in ways that die and cameras barely touch. Still, when I brewed my morning coffee the next week and stepped outside to find a fresh delivery waiting on my stoop, intact and unopened, I felt a small, private exhale, the kind that comes after you turn the key on a difficult lock and realize the door stayed shut, at least for now. For a few weeks after the die incident, the neighborhood seemed quieter, almost unnaturally so, as though everyone were waiting for the next episode of a reality show to air. The gossip simmered. The HOA meetings were temporarily suspended, and for the first time in years Karen's pastel presence didn't patrol the sidewalks with Princess like some suburban security drone, which should have felt like peace but instead carried a strange, taut silence that made me check over my shoulder whenever I went to get the mail. Because the note she'd left, "You have no idea what's coming next," had planted a small seed of unease that watered itself daily with imagination. I thought maybe she'd try to vandalize something or file another baseless report. But weeks passed and nothing happened until a Friday morning in late October when a certified letter arrived from the county courthouse. Mayers versus Collins. Civil complaint, claiming defamation, emotional distress, and intentional infliction of humiliation via chemical assault. I laughed at first, incredulous. Then my stomach dropped as I realized she'd actually done it. Filed a lawsuit over being caught stealing. Twisting the narrative into one where I was the aggressor, the mad engineer who set traps for harmless grandmothers, and the pink stains had become Exhibit A in her story of persecution. It was absurd, but absurd things in the right hands can still cost money. And soon I was sitting across from a lawyer explaining that, yes, I had built a die trap, and yes, it was intentional, and no, I didn't physically harm her, but yes, it might have been technically a form of booby trap. And I hated that word because it sounded malicious, like I'd rigged an IED instead of a glorified paint bomb. My lawyer, a pragmatic woman named Felicia with tired eyes and a voice that carried calm authority, told me to relax. "She's bluffing," she said. "People like that sue to intimidate, not to win. We'll counter with theft, trespassing, and invasion of privacy." But the word lawsuit still rattled in my skull, heavy and real, like a dull echo of all the power Karen had lost in the HOA being reforged through bureaucracy. The weeks leading up to the hearing were surreal. Neighbors who had once joked about the die now avoided eye contact, afraid of being subpoenaed, and others whispered support but only in private messages. The digital equivalent of closing blinds before speaking. Karen, for her part, had returned to her rounds, with renewed purpose, holding her phone out as you walked, recording everything, occasionally pausing to take photos of my house, perhaps to collect evidence of her supposed trauma. Her once bloodshot skin now pale again, but her expression sharper, like a knife that had been honed on grievance. The day of the hearing. The courthouse smelled like stale paper and recycled air, and Karen arrived in muted beige instead of pink, her attorney carrying a binder thick enough to flatten a cat. And when the judge, a tall man with rimless glasses, asked her to describe the incident, She spoke with trembling indignation about being sprayed with corrosive chemical in an unprovoked act of hostility, her voice quavering in the perfect pitch of victimhood, though when the footage was played in the courtroom saw her pick up the box, pause to check the label, and then get engulfed in a cloud of fuchsia mist. Even the judge's mouth twitched, the corners tugging at a suppressed smile. Felicia leaned over and whispered, "That's the face of a man trying not to laugh." And for the first time that morning, I breathed. Karen's lawyer tried to argue entrapment, malicious intent, emotional scarring, but Felicia dismantled it point by point. The plaintiff was on the defendant's property without permission, in possession of a package addressed to someone else, and the device in question contained non-toxic dye. Until finally the judge dismissed the emotional distress claim and ordered mediation for the rest, saying both parties should find a path to civility, which in legal terms meant nobody's winning today. Yet it was enough. Karen's grand legal strike had fizzled, and though she didn't have to pay my fees, the expression on her face as she realized the courtroom was laughing at her was a small, perfect victory. Still, humiliation is a strange fertilizer. It doesn't kill resentment. It grows new roots in darker soil. And over the next month, Karen shifted strategies, trading direct, confrontation for subtle sabotage, HOA memos citing new neighborhood safety policies that coincidentally banned visible cameras, reminders about proper porch presentation that targeted anyone with package lockers, whispers to newcomers that I was a guy who sprays people. Her power may have been diluted, but her talent for manipulation was intact, and soon the community divided again, half tired of her, half afraid of crossing her, and I found myself reluctantly becoming a symbol, the man who'd stood up to her tyranny, which wasn't a role I'd ever wanted. My quiet street became a Cold War battlefield of passive-aggressive gestures, neighbors turning sprinklers on when others walked by, anonymous notes left on cars, HOA meetings turning into shouting matches about safety, respect, and dye traps, while I just tried to work, to live, to not think about how one impulsive act of revenge had ignited a suburban revolution. Then one night, around 11 p.m., I heard movement outside. Soft, deliberate steps. And when I checked the porch camera feed, my stomach twisted. A figure crouching near my mailbox, face hidden under a hood, flashlight in hand. I called out through the speaker, "I can see you." And the figure froze, then bolted into the darkness, leaving behind a smear of something thick and oily on the handle. In the morning light it gleamed faintly silver, like grease mixed with glitter, and there was a smell, chemical, sharp. The police came, took samples, promised to. Check, but I knew it was her, because that night, after they left, I found a small piece of stationery wedged into the shrub by the porch, her signature cursive again. "An eye for an eye, Mr. Collins. Let's see how you like being painted." She'd escalated, but instead of fear I felt something colder, calmer, a kind of clarity that only comes when someone insists on turning your life into a vendetta. I installed more cameras, replaced locks, and began documenting everything, not for revenge this time, but for record, because I'd learned that the only real weapon against a bureaucratic manipulator is precision and patience. Winter arrived, brittle and gray, and with it came silence again, until the HOA's annual elections in February, where a group of fed-up residents, led by Mrs. Parker, the retired teacher who'd seen enough, nominated an alternative board slate and won by a landslide. Karen was formally removed from all positions of authority. Her endless reign of pastel terror finally ended, and for a few glorious weeks, peace returned. She retreated indoors, curtains drawn, princess unseen, her once bustling corner house now a fortress of bitterness, and I thought maybe that was it. She'd burn out quietly, nurse her grudges in private. But fate has a sense of humor. In March, a massive storm hit the town, wind tearing shingles, flooding driveways. And while helping neighbors secure loose garbage bins and fallen branches, I saw something floating in the runoff at the corner drain. A cardboard box, waterlogged and burst open, leaking streaks of pink dye that bled across the pavement like a ghost of my earlier prank. I followed the trail with dread curiosity and found it led straight to Karen's property, her front door ajar, her yard a mess of soaked packages, some marked with my address, others with different names entirely. The police were called again, this time not by me but by another neighbor whose missing parcels had turned up in her garage when the door was blown open by the storm, and the officers found enough stolen goods to fill a van. She was arrested quietly, no cameras, No spectacle, just a woman who had spent years controlling everyone else finally losing control completely. I watched from across the street as they led her away, Princess barking helplessly from inside, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, but a slow, deep sadness. Because somewhere between the die and the lawsuits, we'd both become caricatures of ourselves. She the tyrant, me the trickster, and it struck me how thin the line is between justice and obsession. The neighborhood recovered slowly after that, people planting new flowers, repainting fences, pretending normalcy had never been interrupted, and my porch, once a battleground, returned to being just wood and welcome mats again. Sometimes, when a new package arrives, I still think of the pink mist blooming in the air, the look of shock on Karen's face, the way power reveals itself when it's stripped of consequence, and I wonder if I'd do it again knowing everything that came after, the sleepless nights, the courtrooms, the neighbors turning distant. But then I remember the first theft, the smugness, the certainty she'd never be caught, and I think maybe I would, though differently, wiser, quieter. Now the dye stain on my garage floor has finally faded, the cameras blink less often, and the only color that lingers is a faint blush of sunrise that paints the street each morning, washing over doorsteps and mailboxes alike, over a neighborhood that learned, messily, hilariously, painfully, that even in the calmest cul-de-sacs, justice sometimes arrives not in a courtroom, but in a cloud of pink mist.